So first of all, welcome everyone to BRIIA and to the second annual State of the Startup event. Just a quick reminder, BRIIA is a new kind of global virtual accelerator where we actually give every early stage founder a customized startup plan that they can complete at any time at their own pace. We're essentially a founder's personal startup accelerator. And at our annual State of the Startup event every year, we like to take one topic and explore it in depth, a topic that's relevant to founders. Last year, we hosted investors and founders and had a great discussion about changes in the capital market at a time when the market was in great upheaval. And at that event, we were actually delighted to be serving some great food and drink to all that came. Now, we'd love to continue that tradition tonight, but unfortunately, it does seem that the world's changed just a tiny little bit. And even though there will be no food or drink magically delivered to your door this evening, I am very excited to share this awesome panel with you this evening and this very important topic. It does seem that there's a little bit of a trade-off. There's no food and drink on the one hand, and we can't be in person, but at the other hand, we actually have tonight a global reach to a community of people who are interested in the topic that we're tackling. So let me be the first to welcome everyone to this incredible panel and to this evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are, event. So just a few housekeeping things. So I want to share my screen here. Let's see if I can do that. Just a few housekeeping events. We are, first of all, in the Zoom webinar. And so it's a separate app, and the events controls at the bottom of your screen might look a little different than what you're used to. So just be aware that that's that it's normal because you're seeing the webinar app, not the Zoom app. And most importantly, you'll see a little Q&A icon at the bottom, and that is your connection to the panel. So anytime you have a question throughout the evening, feel free to drop a question in the Q&A window, and we'll be monitoring that and getting to as many questions as we can throughout the evening. And then first, because it's the web application, you will likely not see any videos other than the panel or the person that's speaking tonight. You won't see the usual customary everybody little videos that you do in the regular Zoom. So it is a function of the webinar app, not your Zoom that's acting up and somehow you can't find the images of everybody else who's logging in. So last but not least, it would be really great if everyone would just type into the chat window, not the Q&A, but the chat window, where you're from tonight, just to give us a sense of kind of where people are hailing from as they connect to this topic this evening. So great. So tonight we have a terrific panel, and it is my pleasure to introduce the chief panel orchestrator. That would be Shelly Hendricks. Shelly is the CEO and founder of Blue Horizon Solutions. It's an executive coaching firm that focuses on navigating complex changes. And she started her career in firms that we probably all recognize at Documentum, at McAfee, and Chevron. And not only is she a certified coach, but she also has a master's in science in instructional design. So you can go to her website and take her courses. And just because that's not enough, she's actually pursuing a PhD in organizational development and change. Just for fun, Shelly is a master scuba diver trainer, and she's really passionate about marine conservation. Of course, the most important thing about Shelly, I would be remiss if I didn't say it, is that she's been a mentor for BRIIA and startup companies that have come through the BRIIA program for nearly 3 years. So please join me in a warm welcome to Shelly Hendricks, your panel moderator and chief orchestrator for the evening. Shelly, over to you.
Thanks, Les. I appreciate your kind words, and it's an honor and a privilege to get to be part of this event tonight. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to present to you our 5 panelists. But what I'd like to do is share with you a sense of where we're going in our time together this evening. And so basically, I'll invite each of the panelists to introduce themselves briefly. We'll have some questions for the founders. We'll check in and see what questions you have for the founders at first. We'll switch over to our investors and hear from them and their perspectives and experiences. We'll also check in with your questions for our investors. And then what we'd like to do is open it up for Q&A more broadly to the entire panel. So we'd love to engage in dialogue with you, and we're glad to have you be part of our event today. So to kick us off, why don't we turn to our panelists? And I'd like to invite Diane to introduce yourself, if you would, please. If you'd share your name, company, and your connection to our topic for this evening.
Yeah, so my name is Diane Strutner, and I'm the CEO and founder of Datazoom. We're an enterprise B2B SaaS platform, a video data platform, and we were part of BRIIA's very first cohort of companies. I was going through a really interesting transitional time with my leadership team, and I really enjoyed my time at BRIIA. It's also been really interesting fundraising for an enterprise tech solution that's very niche, being a woman in a male-dominated industry. So I'm really glad to be here today and to be discussing this topic with all of you guys.
Great, thank you. Carolyn, how about you?
Hello, my name is Carolyn Peer, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Humaxa. We provide the AI assistant that predicts and prevents your key employees from leaving. And I'm also here as a founder and have experienced the very drastic ups and downs of fundraising. As in a very male-dominated. I mean, AI is certainly something that's very, very deep tech oriented and definitely very male-dominated. And be happy to share more as we continue the conversation.
Excellent, thank you. And then Alexa, how about you to kick off our investors?
Hi, I'm Alexa Binns. I'm with Halogen Ventures. We're based in LA. Our GP is Jesse Draper, who's a fourth generation venture capitalist. And our focus is on investing in co-ed and female founded teams. So I have the pleasure of working now with over 60 female founded businesses.
Excellent, thank you. And then Iris, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, I think we lost your audio, Iris.
Can you hear me?
There. Yep, that's good, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to say right now that I have some dogs that are barking in the background, so which is why I'm on mute and wandering all over. I'm with Golden Seeds. I retired after a 33-year career in aerospace and ended up becoming an angel investor with Golden Seeds, a national group that focuses on investing in women-led companies. It's 15 years old. We've invested over $135 million in women-led companies over that period of time, and we definitely understand the gender gap because for the most part, we're probably 80% women.
Fantastic. And you shared with us earlier some of the interesting stories that you've seen along the way. So we look forward to hearing your lessons learned from that as well. Thank you. And Cindy, would you please introduce yourself for us as well?
Sure, happy to. I'm Cindy Padnos. I'm the founder and managing partner of Illuminate Ventures. We are a seed stage venture capital firm focused exclusively on B2B or enterprise software. We're operating out of our third fund. We've invested across about 30 companies, had some great exits, like companies like Exactly went public and then acquired by Vista Private Equity. Content Stack, which is a phenomenal woman-led company in our platform, has gone from zero to tens of millions in recurring revenue in just 4 years, and many others. I'm a founder and CEO myself by background, and my entire career has been in the enterprise space.
Fantastic. You can share perspectives from both sides as well.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, great. Well, what an exciting panel we have this evening with us. And I'm honored to get to share this time with you all. So thank you for your introductions. Let's go ahead and turn to our founders first. So Diane and Carolyn, I'm just directing this question to both of you, and you can each take in turn. And then if the investors would like to share a bit of their experience with that briefly as well. I thought it would be helpful for Diane and Carolyn, first of all, to share a little bit more. You touched on it briefly in your introductions, but if you go slightly deeper into how would you describe your experience in sort of launching your company? What was that like for you? And specifically as it relates to the topic.
Should I go first?
Please go ahead. I see that you're unmuted. Yeah.
Okay. Well, the short answer is extremely scary. I had worked as an early employee at a startup that was acquired. And then after we were acquired, I ended up taking a role running one of their groups. And, you know, it was a good job. I worked with great people. They were very smart. I had a chance to lead a multinational organization. I learned a ton. You know, there was actually a paycheck every couple of weeks. I had benefits. There were all these things that were very, very difficult to walk away from. And in all honesty, it took me 3.5 years to leave and to venture out and start Humaxa. And I know lots of founders have the opportunity to kind of do a side gig while they stay in their regular jobs. But my job was not one that I could do that. There weren't enough hours in the day to do my regular job and another job. Not to mention, it's actually in the same space. So, you know, future of work and HR technology, it's something that I know like the back of my hand. And I wanted to make a very clean break so there would never be any question about IP or anything else. So, yeah, that was the long story, but the short is, I was scared out of my wits. And by the way, I still am.
They say fear can be a motivator as well. Sorry, Diane, go ahead. Would you please share your experience?
Yeah, so I was in the space in which Datazoom operates today previously, and I did have one of those like aha moments that hit me pretty severely. And over the course of a 2-week period, I did a ton of, you know, consulting calls with other people in this space, but maybe for flair and dramaticism, decided to quit my job on my 27th birthday and to go start Datazoom. And I think I've been less scared. It's been more exciting for me than scary. There've been plenty of scary moments, but I think I've been more excited than anything to go after and create something and build something and try and get a whole industry to adopt your perspective. And I've enjoyed taking on the challenge of trying to get other people to see things the way that I see them. And for me, that's the part that's most rewarding. And we're now in a position where we see the benefit that we're providing to customers through that vision as well. And that's, I think, what's really started to close the loop and make this all come full circle. So I mentioned that I joined BRIIA for their first cohort, which for me was about 9 months into, maybe 7 months into starting Datazoom. I was just going through a transitional period where my co-founder had stepped out, and so I had brought on a second. Now was going to be my CTO, and now this person is having difficulties. So in the middle of this BRIIA program, I'm like, wow, do I even continue to go on now that I don't feel like I need to go for a third time recruit, the technical leader that's going to help build out this extremely technical product. And that was really hard. But what I got through BRIIA was a lot of structure, and I knew that if I might hit some speed bumps along the way, but this was, I believe so strongly in it. And yes, I went, 15 months without a paycheck and racked up way too much. I didn't tell my parents about how much debt I'd racked up on credit cards until after we closed our first round of funding, and I could repay myself back for some of the debts that I had invested in the company. But it was, I learned so much throughout this journey. And I think for me specifically, like on the fundraising side, my story developed a lot when I was at BRIIA. I for sometimes for fun and, you know, pat on the back for how far you've come, you bring up those old pitch decks from like way back when, and you're like, wow, I showed this to people. That is insane. But what I really enjoyed about the BRIIA program was it really taught the importance of story and storytelling. And that's been really key and has been continued to evolve as I've been pitching Datazoom. And so we closed our first round of funding through an angel round of funding, I think 90 days out from finishing BRIIA. 2 years later, closed our first round of venture funding, which I guess would be February of last year. And it's been a really interesting ride going from angel round to first kind of institutional investors. I took a long time, sorry.
It's okay. Context for the ongoing dialogue, right? That's okay. Thank you. Really appreciate your story about flair and dramaticism and the opportunity and embracing what's possible. Very exciting. And so I'm curious to hear from both of you briefly. So the topic for tonight is addressing the gender gap. So what does that mean to you?
So for me, in addressing the gender gap, I think it starts by recognizing that there is a gender gap. And I think it's important from what I experienced, and I pitched, you know, I think 180 VCs before we eventually landed with a group of investors that led our round in February, who I could not ask for more supportive investors. But what I noticed was that when I was looking for someone to go pitch to at that firm, I was almost never pitching to a woman. So there were plenty of firms that had initiatives to go support women entrepreneurs that focused on, you know, B2B, and there were women at the organization, but a lot of the venture groups are divisionally focused. And so finding, for example, a woman that I could pitch to at that organization or that had context was really hard. And it was almost, you know, I would say is probably less than 5% of the investors that I ever pitched were, or I would say even involved in a pitch was a woman. And that was something that I found difficult. And I think kind of a second area that I thought about this a little bit before came here today. I think potentially parts of the process for investors doing diligence on deals can also introduce bias as well. So when you have, you know, a young female-founded company that you're running diligence on in a kind of older male-dominated industry, and you provide that context as part of the reference when you're trying to go get feedback. And so you're going and getting references from also people who are, you know, not kind of well represented, then I think that can also present challenges in how investors evaluate a deal. And I think, you know, one other thing that bothered me and just, it has been part of my experience is that I felt a certain level of mistrust from some things that I've stated about the industry or how things work. I have a sales background. I don't have a technical background, but the way that I sold previously was purely on sales technicality. And I think that oftentimes there was some level of untrust that things cannot be this way. She must be missing something, you know, very core and foundational, because I'm sure this problem has already been solved. And I'm not saying that this doesn't happen to every entrepreneur. It's just, I felt like it happened a fair amount to me. And of course, the very common one of, well, this can't be your brainchild. Like, oh, was it your, you know, original co-founder that had the idea for this and whatnot? And I ran into that a lot as well. And again, I think some of these problems affect everyone, but since we're here talking about problems that, can potentially compound, kind of wanted to bring some of those things to the surface.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those insights and experiences. I saw a lot of head nodding among our panelists during your story. Thank you for bringing those to light. We'll have a chance to dive into that, I think, in a little bit. Carolyn, I'd like to hear your perspective as well. I know we had a chance to chat earlier as well, and I know you're very passionate about this subject too. Would you like to share your perspective?
Sure, absolutely. So I think in the very beginning, I probably, like most first-time founders, just didn't get it. My background is entirely in science and technology. I've worked around men my whole life, and I don't think I really realized until I became a founder how lucky I've been to work with men who just treated me like one of the gang. And so when I started pitching and presenting my ideas, and I didn't understand, like I'd go again and again and again and just get no after no after no after no, which, by the way, is very common. This is it's the typical scenario. But what I didn't understand is why no one ever told me the reasons. And it was always this sort of ambiguous no, and then there was never something really concrete that I could sink my teeth into. And of course, many times that was because people probably just didn't want to hurt my feelings. But the people who really did talk to me, the people who cared about me a lot, would say things like, well, Carolyn, you're not 22, you're not male, you're not an Ivy League college dropout. What did you think was going to happen? And my mind was literally blown. Like, what? People, this is 2020, right? Well, at that time it wasn't, but we do live in the modern world, right? And they're like, no, you don't get it, Carolyn. You don't get it. And so this concept of, I started to hear these words, pattern matching over and over and over. And so, I really dug into those words in particular, trying to figure out what does that exactly mean. And the conclusion I essentially came to is that pattern matching is evolutionarily built into us, right? It's a survival mechanism. And I think Shelly, the example I gave with you is, if you're going to go pick wild mushrooms to put in your risotto or something, you better pattern match, right? You better get out that book and make sure you're pattern matching those mushrooms, or you're going to get poisonous mushrooms and have a catastrophe on your hands. There's nothing inherently wrong with pattern matching. I think from an evolutionary standpoint, we do that automatically. But in the world of venture capital and in fundraising, there are some negative repercussions of pattern matching because it's all based on history. So, the words that really come to mind is when you hear about investments and how, previous returns don't guarantee future results, those kind of things. Sometimes there's definitely some negative repercussions of pattern matching in this particular situation. And I think once communities kind of get their head wrapped around that, you can really see that it's really through education that we can overcome some of these negative tendencies going forward. So I'm hoping we're making a dent. That's it.
Yeah, our conversation really also talked about how pattern matching can be used for good or for evil.
Right.
Right. And even if it's not intended to be used for evil, sometimes it happens innocuously or seemingly
absolutely
outside of consciousness, let's say.
Yes, completely unconscious.
Awareness, right? Yeah, and that's what leads to micro inequities, bias, things like that.
Sure.
So thank you for introducing that concept and bringing that to light for this conversation. So I'd like to, so let's check in, John and Les. Do we have any questions for the founders at this point? Or did the other panelists have a question for the founders?
Well, if I could, this is Cindy, I'd love to add something to that.
Sure.
So Carolyn, I totally hear what you're saying. The company I founded was nearly 20 years ago. I did not have the opportunity out of my, 75 or so pitches to ever pitch a woman VC, not one in the enterprise space. And when I launched Illuminate Ventures, I literally had someone say to me, Cindy, don't you understand that venture is a young man's sport? Mm. And I was like, okay, young. I don't know who's measuring. According to my family, I'm young because I'm the youngest in the family. So I'll take that. Man, definitely not. And sport, I don't like watching a bunch of guys run around in shorts and trip each other and et cetera. So, I just decided to ignore that and build a firm. And you're doing the same thing with your company, which I applaud. On the topic of unconscious bias, I've been collaborating with students at Carnegie Mellon for 10 years now, writing papers about this gender gap and how women and men think differently and how women and men VCs think differently, not just entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. And all the way back in the first paper, I discovered a word I had never heard before called homophily. And what homophily basically means is that if you go look it up in Webster's, it's just basically described as how each of us, male, female, doesn't matter what, has a natural affinity towards things that are more like us. So I speak French. If I walk into a room where I know no one, but I hear someone in the corner speaking French, I am likely to go walk over to that corner, right? And there's somebody I have something in common with, right? And so a great deal of what you see happening today is just as you said, it's legacy, it's history. People are generally more comfortable with people more like themselves. And even worse than that, I would say, is when times are tough, when people get backed up to a wall, when we've had financial debacles and other things, they're even more likely to do that. So we just published our latest paper, this one looking at literally last week, taking a student view of all of this data, not just looking at current entrepreneurs, but what we think are the future entrepreneurs, and asking them a whole bunch of questions. And it was very interesting to see what they had to say. The motivations, by the way, for men and women to be entrepreneurs are almost identical, almost identical. And the number one, and I've heard it in both of what you've already said, the number one reason they all choose is to bring great ideas to life, to bring something I'm passionate about and believe in, to life, which I think is super cool.
So if I could tag on to that, one of the reasons I joined Golden Seeds, and I haven't been with them very long, I lead the local chapter here in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, but I've only been an angel investor for 2 years. But the reason I joined Golden Seeds is their thesis was, in fact, 15 years ago, they looked around and they said, at that point in time, new businesses were being started by women. 15%, let's say, of new businesses were being started by women, but they were getting only 2 to 3% of the funding in order to get started. And the thesis was, unless you change the investor class, you're not going to get the money into these women-owned businesses, these women-led businesses. And so Golden Seeds was started in order to recruit and actually teach women to invest and also invest in women-led companies. And so in the 15 years that it's been around, the amount of money going into women-led businesses by angel investors has risen to around 23%, along with the investor class that are women. Now, I would also say that we have implicit bias. We all have implicit bias, and even, we women do, because we'll ask, and I'm sure we'll get to it later on, but, the tendency is you ask men what the upside is, whether or not you're going to be a unicorn, how wonderful it's going to be, but you ask women risk mitigation questions. What about this? Have you thought about that? So the questions are being asked by investors are different of men and women. And we as investors, even women investors, we find ourselves falling into that trap and then having to reset and go, wait a minute here. You know, we've got to look at the idea, we've got to look at the structure the same way you would look at any other investment. And we do that over and over again.
Oh, that's such an important point. Thanks for adding that. Alexa, I'd like to invite you to chime in on this conversation as well. What have you seen from your perspective?
Yeah. Well, I have the, I guess, luck of having a job where meeting remarkable female founders is never a problem. There are so many women starting amazing businesses. I think a topic that we haven't really quite touched on is sort of like, what is the ultimate goal? And my job is to find unicorns. And I think sometimes it's a little bit of a education or a reminder of what game we're playing. Like, what's this sport? You know, you get like the first woman in the NFL, and like, okay, like we kind of got to look around us and see what we're being judged on. And there's, I think, 200 companies a year go public on the main trading Wall Street, and average, it's like 2 a year are companies that are brought IPO by a woman founder. So like we are all Kamala Harris's here. Like, we are still the first people to do this. And so it's gonna be like a rough ride, because it's a remarkable thing to make a company into a unicorn, let alone with biases that you're facing. And so I think it's like just kind of an interesting thing to step back and be like, oh man, like what are we being judged on? Where when you are thinking about what you're going out to pitch, like, just remember, like, you're Kamala in your own world, that you are really one of the first people to ever really like try to accomplish this on that big a scale. And at Halogen, we believe like this is the future, that we've been undervalued, and you give women capital and they'll build remarkable businesses. But I don't know, in the poem that was read at the inauguration, she said that's unfinished. Like we've got a ways to go. Mm-hmm.
And I would say, Alexa, that the women that we see, and I've seen them over and over again, we have a tendency to undersell and underpromise because we don't want to fail. Mm-hmm. And so I've mentored a lot of women CEOs, and the thing is that they won't come in and show what the best case knock it out of the park scenario might be, whereas a guy might.
Yeah.
But they'll come in with, hey, I know I can do this, I can promise this, I can stand behind this. Well, you know, there's a certain amount of bravado, I guess, or the ability to really pitch that upside, mm-hmm. that most women, they have to really be encouraged to create or show when they're pitching to us. And so, you know, I mean, the feedback that we get oftentimes is, wow, it's so refreshing to present to a predominantly female investor group, because it feels so much more inviting and welcoming. We try to do the mentoring and provide office hours. And that's the discussion that we have over and over again with entrepreneurs that come to us.
Great. Yeah. So you've both touched on a bit of actually our next question, which is around, undoubtedly you've seen companies that succeed and you've seen some be less successful. So if there are some significantly different traits among those companies that succeed, what would those be? What are those traits?
So that's Cindy again. I would say a big piece of it is building a great team, surrounding themselves with just extraordinary talent. And that's everything from who are your outside advisors and legal and accounting and other resources to your direct team. The one thing I would always say to a founder is never settle. Don't settle for who your investor is, who's sitting at the table with you. Don't settle for who you hire for your VP of sales or your VP of engineering, whatever hires are your key hires at first. You only get one of those. And so I would say that's one piece of it. The other is the most successful companies that I've seen in our portfolio have typically bootstrapped, some of them more than a year before they raise outside capital. That's not easy to do. I did it in my own startup. I know. I mean, I did it for about 9 months and put my own capital in, and it's very hard to do. We literally work from my home, 3 of us, and but those companies know the value of a dollar. They are very scrappy. They've already, gotten to the point where they all pretty much know how to collaborate and work with each other. We similar to, just 2 years ago, we did the set of research we did. We asked entrepreneurs themselves, what do you think are the most critical elements of success in entrepreneurship? And we asked the VCs, by the way, the same question. And I would say, again, just a disproportionate share of the responses that came back from all of the participants, the number one was perseverance and resilience. And I've certainly heard it tonight already in the voices of the founders on our session, because if they didn't have that, they never would have raised their capital, for gosh sakes. 180 contacts, that I think I would have been daunted by that even, right? And I'm pretty tough, I'm pretty resilient. So that literally was number one on the list.
Great, thank you. And Alexa or Iris, what other traits do you see consistently that are significantly different among those companies that are successful? In other words, what differentiates them?
Well, I was thinking about, Diane, your comment that you met with 180 people before you closed your round, and I imagine that sales process, I think, like running a super tight process in terms of getting a fundraising round closed has been a really distinct sort of standout skill in terms of fundraising. It's like it's like sales qualifying leads that, you are putting them through the pipeline and it's narrowing down, and like a clear no is more valuable than a maybe. And
Yes.
those people who sort of recognize that this is like its own skill, fundraising, I think do really good. They like prepare for the day that they're going to go out. They have an insane Airtable or Excel sheet where they're tracking it all, and they're sort of, they always have 40 more conversations in the pipeline, and they're not expecting anyone to really land. So I consider fundraising a skill. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Iris, what would you? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say too, from the other side, what it took to actually finally close the deal. I mean, it was definitely a lot of perseverance, but it was also continuing to evolve the story. And, it's crazy. There's been exactly zero change to the product, the vision, how we're going to grow, all of the people we're bringing on, the partners we're working with. It's literally, if you go back 4 years, you could literally take out logos and names and things from that deck and things that are going to happen, and you'll see them in the new deck, but the story around it has entirely changed. And I think it's really important when, if I had to go back and tell myself some advice, it would be way more. I mean, I thought I was doing a good job of finding like B2B enterprise investors who, had made an adjacent investment to this space. Another thing that I thought potentially ambitiously was that if you could get your foot in the door and then you could provide them with enough resources so they would get excited about it. And I learned that that was not how investing works on the other side. It was really like someone has to come to the table already interested and probably somewhat experienced in this space in order to like take the leap and go to the next round. And the only thing that's changed so far is the story, and then evolving that story to specifically the type of investor that I know I'm going to have the most success with. It's going to run over the heads of some people that are unqualified, and that's fine. And I shouldn't be reaching out to them anyway. And I don't think I ever did any like, you know, severe mistakes of reaching out to like a B2C investor or something like that. But telling the story, I would just say, like, if you are an entrepreneur, go and tell the story and continue to evolve it over and over again. I will also say this, which is that I received a ton of feedback on my pitch, which I know that many people are trying to come from a good place, but I wrote this down. Seek to understand before being understood. A lot of my experience with advice has been someone who doesn't quite yet understand actually what I'm trying to pitch, and then giving advice on how to make the pitch better. And it's like, I think a rule of thumb should be, if you really cannot outside of just the advice of like, I don't get it, which is valuable, but like in terms of you're trying to craft someone's story, but you can't with conviction say, I totally understand what this person is doing, don't give any advice, because you might be altering the story in a way that is not helpful. And I've actually found when I've gone back and looked over my pitch decks, that eventually I actually came back to a model I'd had like 4 or 5 months prior, but someone gave me advice and it skewed me off. And yeah, and I would say like something I would ask of investors is to disqualify yourself from a deal early on, and disqualify, you know, giving advice unless it's something like, hey, I just didn't get it and it's not for me, or like this specific slide was like too much text, something like that, outside of presentation details. Anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I see a couple of comments as well. Great advice about advice is in the chat. It reminds me too, we often say that feedback is a gift, and you have the opportunity. First, you say thank you, right? Because they don't have to give you feedback. But then you have the opportunity to try it on and see if it fits, and see if you want to keep it, and see if you want to integrate it into your wardrobe, or if you want to return it, or, you know, how you want to handle and what you want to do with that feedback. So it is your choice. So thank you for sharing that. I think that's always a really important perspective to share. So thanks. I see that we do have a question popping in here. So I'll put this out to the entire panel. This is a very interesting question. It says, so are women less resilient and perseverant, or have less bravado? Or is an answer to simply teach these skills, or there are other underlying reasons?
I would love to answer that question.
Take it.
And I'm sure everybody on this panel would. The answer is no, they are not less resilient. There are more, generally speaking. I would say that the women that we see understand that it takes grit and resilience, and they have been crawling over broken glass for quite some time. It is the culture and the environment around us that have disfavored women. And I want to go back to the gender gap, because we're talking about, I just got this Halo report from the Angel Research Institute. It's a nonprofit that goes out and interviews companies. And in 2019, women CEOs comprised approximately 17% of all seed Series A rounds, an increase of over 1% from 2018. Woo! So, you know, we are talking about women who comprise 50%, 51% of our population, right? And I'm fairly passionate about this because I spent 33 years launching rockets and building satellites in a predominantly male-dominated field. And I know women have to be at least 5 times as good as a man in order to get the credibility for what they've done. So take that, and I will say that most of the women that I have seen are 5 times more competent than many of the men I've seen. They have a lot more credibility. They're a lot more solid. The numbers are better. And that's why we invest, Golden Seeds invests in women, not because it's a charity. It's because we expect women. Our investment thesis is women are going to make us money. Because they know how to crawl over broken glass. So no, I don't believe that we need to coach women to be a little bit more gritty and more resilient. I think that we need to open the doors for women so that they get a fair shake when they pitch, and give them the credibility when they walk in the door that a man does.
I'll add to
Yes, let's go ahead to Cindy first. Go ahead. And then
So I think the real thing we have to focus on here is the last thing that Iris said, which is how do we open the door wider? Okay. What we've done at Illuminate from day one, for example, is we've built an advisory board that is 2/3 women. They happen to be some of the most successful enterprise tech people in the world, not women in the world. And 1/3 of our advisors are unbelievable men. So we have, we do that for a reason. One, they provide access, that group of just 45 people, to 200 private company boards they've sat on, over 100 public company boards that they have sat on. And many of them have been founders, CEOs themselves that you've never heard of, that have had 100 million, multi-100 million, and even multi-billion-dollar exits. But you don't know their names. I can guarantee you that. You can go look at our website and go, huh, really? She had a $3 billion exit? Kira Makagon? I've never heard of her, right? And many others on that list. The other thing that we do and others can do is we run a major internship effort during the class year, not summer interns. And 2/3 of those people are diverse as well. More than half of them women. Our own portfolio, as a result, even though we never ever use gender, ethnicity, or anything else as an investing criteria, over half of the companies have at least one woman co-founder, and all of those companies are enterprise B2B software companies. They're not consumer healthcare or some other thing where you're going to find more women founders than in our category. So people have to take initiative, I guess is what I'm saying. They can't just sit back and say, oh, there are obstacles. Oh, we're not treated the same. We have to take initiative. And, we're a small firm, but we do this research, we publish it, we practice we walk the walk, we don't just talk the talk. And I think many organizations can do the same. And Golden Seed certainly has done a great job of that over the years.
What I was going to say, though, which I think could be helpful for BRIIA as a program in supporting women, is that I think that you can provide. I had a few experiences with investors where they were just completely mean and rude. And I think that if I had not been a woman, I wouldn't have experienced that kind of treatment. And I think teaching women that this is a two-sided equation, and that, yes, the thing that was really hard is that you have this person who has the potential to invest in your company and see your dreams come to fruition. But I think Cindy pointed out, you should be making decisions about those investors, and you should treat these conversations as a two-way conversation. And if you have any sense of them not being respectful or whatnot, you should walk away, but you should also say something. You should comment and say, hey, that is inappropriate for you to be addressing me like that, or saying that. Actually, it was leading up to the pitch at BRIIA to present to all of our angel investors. I mean, BRIIA's done a fantastic job, and you can always find a crazy nut egg in there who decides to show up to a pitch, but was completely harassed 10 minutes before going on stage to present to this group of investors. I almost had a nervous breakdown. It was awful. But I think, I've had a lot of experience in sales, so I knew how to bring myself back. but I think also having some discussion around how you can rebuke against some of these questions, how you can exit the situation could be also helpful in a unique way to female entrepreneurs, because that is a reality that we face. So.
If I can jump in and tag along with Diane here, I think that there's another whole aspect of it's not so much about pattern matching, but the old, it's not what you know, it's who you know, right? And if you don't come from a background where you have this tremendous network of investors or friends of investors or founders that you have this enormous relationship, close relationship with, a lot of times I think women founders are kind of starting from ground zero, right? And trying to build that network. And even if there's a situation where you go and you pitch an investor and the answer is no, it's like maybe there's 100 other ways you could help that founder through networking. Whether it's introducing them to a mentor who can really help maybe fill one of their gaps, or just that experience. Not everybody comes to the table with that kind of a network in their back pocket. And that's something that, at least in my experience, that a lot of times women don't necessarily have that same kind of network available to them. And that's something we can all do, right? Because we all know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody, right?
And that's,
also,
it's a great point, Carolyn. And one of the things I would say is, even if you are getting rejected on your pitch, you could always make that ask, right? That's something that I think also women tend to not ask for the things that they actually need or could use. I hate to keep harping on golden seeds, but one of the things that we do try to do with our office hours and also after our screenings and forums is stay in contact with those companies and see if there's anything that we can bring to bear with our networks, and especially our portfolio companies. Yeah. But that is important, and that is true, right? You have to continue to network and reach out and make those good connections, because you never know who's going to make that introduction that you need. And it's good to stay in touch, even if you don't get invested. You don't take it personally. You might still keep in touch with that investor who showed an interest to say, and sometimes it's just too early. So they might say, seriously, it is too early for me, but if you get to this milestone, why don't you get back in contact with me? I have multiple different companies who send me their newsletters, and I'm always happy to post them. And sometimes it's like, hey, it looks like the right time. Are you guys raising? You want to come back?
Right. I see that we do have a couple of questions in the queue. Let's go ahead and hear some of our questions from the audience as well. So one question is, how do you suggest first-time female founders increase access to that network of investors in an efficient or successful way?
I would like to comment.
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
Sorry, I just want to say that I think one of the worst pieces of advice I got was go get a warm introduction, kind of to mirror what Carolyn said. So pretty much all of my investor outreach started as cold outreach. And I was having this discussion internally about hiring, as we're going to be doing hiring this year. And it's really important to me that our team be equally diverse. And so what we were talking about internally was that a great way to diversify our team is to make sure that the applicant pool coming in is equally diverse. So I think one of the compounding challenge that can exist is that if you have, women are, let's say, less connected for some areas than men. They've held traditionally positions that have not been executive levels. We only have now female CEOs, only now are women taking companies IPO. We can accept that the networking is not as great. There should be a distinct effort to accept more pitches and look at more deals that come from women. So I feel, and I think what might need to happen is the expectation that as an investor of I must have a warm introduction in order to take this person or this company seriously really needs to change. We should have doorways in to all investor firms where you don't need to get a warm introduction. And you don't need to get a warm introduction if you're a woman or if you're a minority, or you fit into any of those, underrepresented categories. I think that needs to change. And there are so many investors that I know if I had gotten in the room with them, like I know they would have wanted to make the investment. I just didn't have enough of the connection. And as an entrepreneur, it's really frustrating. But, and I know that every entrepreneur would feel the same way. But I think specifically for women, like having this, you need to have a warm introduction has been like a huge disadvantage. And you read it in all of the books, who are all written by men. So there we go.
Cindy, go ahead.
I'm going to be a contrarian here, and I apologize for that, but I am. And the reason is, it's really simple. We respond to virtually every entrepreneur. We're really unusual as a firm in terms of doing that. We look at everything that comes in, but we do have a category we call entrepreneur direct. Okay, we know that a referral that we receive from a co-investor, from one of our LPs, from one of our partners in whatever way, there's just going to be a lot more data and information about the background of that company and the founder and everything else that, frankly, let me just be really clear here, makes it easier to assess the company. So what you're really talking about are somewhat lazy investors, candidly, who don't want to take the time to try to figure out whether the thousands of inbound emails that they receive, because I literally get thousands, I get about 250 to 300 emails a day, how you sort the wheat from the chaff. Okay, how the heck do you do that? We are really unusual in that we look at everything. Most firms do not. And so one of the ways that an entrepreneur is judged is by how scrappy you are if you want to get access. And let me tell you why there's some merit to it, because that same entrepreneur has to go sell whatever the product they have. And they have to figure out how to gain entree, especially in the B2B space, to some corporate buyer, whoever that may be. And so part of the assessment is, well, gosh, if they can't get to me somehow, how are they going to get to all of these corporate buyers? I'm not trying to justify the fact that this is an obstacle, but it's real. I think the fact that you recognize it is the first thing that you need to, you need to understand that it is real. And it's real in probably 98% of firms out there. And what I was saying at the beginning, don't settle. Get the right advisors, get the right law firm, get the right accounting firm. Those people have a ton of connections. The right bank. I mean, are you banking with FRB or Silicon Valley Bank or someone who has a ton of these connections? And then don't let them off the hook. If they want your business, ask them for help. Tell them who you're looking for. Send that email out to all of them and say, I am looking for an introduction to, Iris at Golden Seeds. Can't one of you possibly make this intro for me? And it will happen. And so I think that, it's just a reality of the world we're in. And by the way, it applies equally to every male founder I know. This is not just a female founder issue.
Yeah, that's true. If I can add one more thing. Oh, sorry.
I was just like, to your credit, Cindy, I emailed you many times and you always responded back to me. So I really appreciate that. But I think at the same time, I totally hear what you're saying. For efficiency purposes, you get so much more data on a pre-vetted company when it's a referral from another investor. And yes, especially a co-investor, it can make the deal so much faster. But at the same time, if the gating factor is getting that first investor anyway, my question is, how do we break that cycle? And I think answering emails from, more people is a great way to start. And I totally get that, and I will say that it was such a unique experience that maybe just starting there would be a great place for everyone to start.
And if I can just add on to what you're saying, Diane, too, we need men. I mean, this is a really, I know that this is a forum for looking at gender equity, but I know from my personal experience speaking with investors, I think it was, I met and pitched Backstage Capital, right? They're known all over for being, investing in underrepresented or, female founders and et cetera. And I had a really candid conversation with one of them. And I mean, they basically told me, look, Carolyn, because we're starting to finally turn the tables here and open up more capital for underrepresented founders, we get like 1,000 times more people coming to us than the typical male investor, because all of a sudden, there's so few of us, and everybody wants to have a female or underrepresented investor on their cap table. And so while it's laudable that we're finally starting to kind of turn the tables, I just like to point out, we need men too. We need allies. We need those folks too who understand the plight and are they have our backs too. So
that was my thought on your first comment, Carolyn, about networking. Primarily the folks who have gone ahead and done this before, to the point about like past results do not imply future earnings, have generally been fellas. And so if something we recommend for all of our founders is to have founder friends who are 1 or 2 series ahead of you in a similar business that's not competitive. So you'll find like the fintech investors, if there's somebody who's already met all 500 of them, that's a really incredible resource and buddy to have. And it also helps sort of put on the mindset of somebody who's gone through it before. And I think it's really helpful if you can find some of those founder friends who happen to be male, because it just shows you like how'd they go into the football arena. Particularly if they're in your industry, because what they'll start referring to some of the VCs by like their first name. Right. So they're like, oh yeah, over Andreessen, Rod, he's tough, but he'll tell you straight, like as though they're best friends in a way that I think really you get like inside info from somebody who's met with all these people before.
Absolutely.
Really great discussion, and we probably could spend a lot of time. I do just want to acknowledge some of the comments and acknowledgements from our group online have joined and said, love what Diane said about the honest assessment of the crushing aspect of some investors' interactions. So being transparent in that sharing is really appreciated. And then also the value in what the VC says, but hoping that there is some change as well. And one other question or comment was shaking it off is an important skill to build also. I think that was related to feedback when we were talking about feedback earlier. So there was a question too, and I think Iris, you spoke to this earlier about the question is, doesn't the data bear out that women-owned and founded women outperform their male counterparts i.e. more profitable? And so, yes. Yeah. So did you want to comment on that a little bit more? You touched on it.
Well, I touched on it a little bit, and I have to say, I came from a pretty large corporation, and I was with a very large aerospace company until 2017, and we had been working on diversity and inclusion for 15, 20 years. And the reason why is because diversity drives a better conclusion always. And so the data finally caught up with what we were doing. I'm going to say maybe 10 years ago, and so it's kind of interesting right now because you've got everybody wanting a woman on the board. In California, of course, there's a requirement for any publicly held company to have a woman on the board, but and I'm sorry, I can't quote the exact articles, but I know Forbes at least has come out with one that shows that companies with at least one woman on the board outperform homogeneous companies by along the order of 17 to 23%, something like this. And that's the bottom line, right? This is not measured basically as you would measure a company on the New York Stock Exchange, right? So it's not, but here's the thing that I always tell people too. It's not because women are like some sort of magic totem. It's because diversity in itself, because it is uncomfortable and drives the dialogue, and you have the headbutting that goes along with it, that drives the better conclusion. And that's why you end up with a better solution. What you don't have is, the line of sheep running off a cliff, right? You have enough different sets of eyes and perceptions that you can come to the table and drive the best solution. And I think, my personal opinion, of course, this is why companies with women in senior positions, executive level positions, do better.
And you touched also on the other dimensions of diversity as well. That diversity in general drives a better outcome. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So we have a couple more questions here that I'll throw out to the group. And then I think we want to wrap up, or I'll go to Les and John to see if we have any additional questions in chat that we want to touch on. But so we have one question says, it was mentioned that women often undersell themselves and their companies. So what activities, exercises, or mindsets would you recommend to aspiring entrepreneurs to work to mitigate this tendency early on?
So I'll go ahead and answer that first, since I'm the one who said it. What I typically do when I work with aspiring entrepreneurs is I tell them that, you don't have to have just one budget or one set of numbers. As a program manager, VP for very large programs, complex programs, one of the things you learn to do is look at best case, worst case, most likely. Mm. And you look at risk mitigation, and you hold, your risk reserve and all that. But you go through this thought process. What are all the possible things that could go wrong? How much money might that cost if, let's say, 75% of them came to fruition, or 50? It doesn't matter, because it's a numbers game, right? So this is my worst case. Or let's say, I've got one thing that's really highly unlikely, but if it happens, it's going to wipe me out. This is my worst case. My best case is everything goes great. Those calls I'm making, they're all taken in them. The people I talk to want, they have a franchise of 1 million things across the globe, and they really love me. And this is what could happen, right? Mm-hmm. But most likely, I'm going to have this much reserve and these many people, and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm going to get a percentage of that, let's say 10% or 20% of my customer target market. And I'm going to get this. So have those 3 sets of numbers so that you know what the size of the funnel is, and be able to speak to all of them, right? I would hold the worst case pretty tight, but the most likely and the best case, it's good to know. And investors want to hear you talk about, hey, I might IPO. At the angel level, we're not really hot on IPOing, because we know that that's not going to happen a lot at the angel level. What we want to see is, I can make it to that next round of funding and you guys can get your money back. But when you hit Alexa's level, they want to hear you say, this is how I can get there, and this is how I can scale if all of these things align. And this is what I'm doing to make that happen.
Great, thank you. So I see we have one last question here that has popped in, and then we'll bring this part of the conversation to a close and move on to Les has some additional information to share about what we are envisioning for the broader community as well. And so I'm curious to hear, oh, someone has actually submitted the question, how have you embraced your unique identity and seen it celebrated in the entrepreneurial community? It's a very open-ended question. Who would like to take that one?
I can jump in and say a couple of things. You know, as tough as it was to be a woman founder, CEO 20 years ago, there were also some really wonderful things about it. I was able to, for example, tell my board that I was going to insist that our independent board member be a woman, that I would not be the only woman on that board. And they were very supportive of that. I was invited to join the advisory board at Carnegie Mellon of the Tepper School when the other advisors on the board were people like the former CEO of Bank of America. And I was this, you know, literally initially the only woman on the board. That's got its huge cons as well as pros, as you can imagine. But I felt like I had an opportunity to speak for an awful lot of people and to do my very best to try to, you know, make change. Let's put it that way. The moniker that Les mentioned at the beginning, you know, Queen B2B. I mean, there wasn't a guy who could have that, is there? So there have been real advantages at times to being a woman in tech. It is not all negative by any means. And I think that there just isn't a better time than now to be a founder, to be a woman, and to do, you know, to make change happen, because we can.
I would like to add to that too. I feel like there's so much, you know, there's so much negative energy sometimes around this whole, you know, concept of overcoming obstacles, and it feels like this enormous hurdle. And let's be honest, a lot of times it is. But I know for me personally, I feel like I finally have found my tribe. I have spent my entire life being just a weirdo. I don't know how else to put it. Like, I was not a good student. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I don't think I could have gotten into one even if I'd wanted to. But as a teenager, I taught myself to speak French, to speak Japanese, to write computer code. I built automatic door openers for every door in our house. I mean, I was always doing these crazy things, and I always thought I was just came out of the mold wrong, you know? And now being an entrepreneur, I'm like, oh yeah, this is where all the weirdos hang out. I feel right at home. And I do really appreciate being able to not just do that, but feel like there's a long-term impact to the things that we're doing. And that makes it all worth it. And I feel extremely lucky to have been able to take this journey.
I kind of, when I was hearing Cindy talk about what she did in her unique position, I felt like she just created her own path and made it what she wanted to be, to some extent. Like, there wasn't a specific opening for a woman that she took the seat, and she insisted, hey, there doesn't have to be a rule about diversity on the board, but I'm going to make one. And I really appreciate that. I think for me, I've applied it not so much in the entrepreneurial community, but more within my industry. So I helped to co-found a Women in Streaming Media group that now has over 900 members. And we have done awesome stuff. We've gotten women to take over really popular podcasts. We work with all of the major event organizers to position women speakers on totally different crazy topics at all of these conferences, because we all hated not having any women on any of the panels or speaking on any of these topics. And there's so much more we'd like to do with the program. Of course, we're all balancing that with our own careers, but I would say, it's been a great community to create. And it spun out of, there was a Women in Streaming Media breakfast that was led by a man. And I was like, this is, no. So we took it all into our own hands and turned it into something pretty cool. But I think when you are unique, you can be like, take full advantage of, you know, I think at this point, everyone is looking for diversity. So use that with your marketing, use that with your press, use that to go and create organizations to support other women. And then I think, like, most importantly, bring other women up. So, you know, we're in the process of making some really senior hires, and like, by all means, I'm putting a woman there. So I think it's important to, you know, talk about diversity and bring other women up with you on your way.
Awesome. Iris or Alexa, any closing thoughts? Alexa? Yeah.
Well, I appreciate everybody gathering here today. As you know, I think this is a topic that, Carolyn, you're right, all of us are a little bit grumpy about. And I think my sort of 2021 intentions are to also spend time on panels and among people who are telling me how to do my job better. So I think that's like one flip side to this, is it's important for us all to get together and talk about the issue. And then the other thing we can do is just get really good at our jobs and knock it out of the park. So if you have a chance to hang out in a group of women who are sort of talking about some of the things that we're facing that are unfair, or spend that hour reading something that's gonna, you know, increase your customer lifetime value. I think it's a trade-off. I think it's important that we get together and that we do this every once in a while because it's cathartic. But I think it's also like when the guys are on the golf course, they're just like trading stock tips and making money for each other. So maybe we should trade some stock tips. You know, like I'd like to get together sometimes and do business. In a way, I think that's like the next step for closing the gender gap.
Great comment. Thank you. Iris, please go ahead.
I think that's true, Alexa. One of the things that we need as women to do is to have that kind of networking also. Here in the Bay Area, we have Women Angels of the Bay Area. Before the pandemic, we would get together once a month for lunch to have lunch and do a little socialization, but also trade deals. You know, we had people from Golden Seeds and Bay Area Angels and MIT Angels, and, you know, all the, you know, there's probably a 100 different angel groups here in the Bay Area. So we would give each other tips and then trade companies back and forth. And we still do it. We do it virtually now. And it's kind of a good thing. But it's something that you have to practice because you're not used to doing that. But going back to the open-ended question about how do you bring your unique self or something like that, I will have to say the reason I'm grumpy is I spent 30 some years in industry, and I started out when you guys were probably not even a gleam in your parents' eyes. And I agree with Diane that it's not all a bad thing to be the only person in the room who looks like you. Use it. It's great. I mean, use your voice. But the other thing is that I spent a lot of time learning how to pull the levers in that society. And now I am looking to you guys to change that society so women don't have to do that. And I'm really an advocate of that. So, you know, both. I've fit in and learned how to do the thing. I'd love to see women not have to do that.
Well, that's an excellent point for us to wrap this conversation on for tonight. And I just want to say thank you all for contributing to the chat as well. There's been a whole lot of really cool dialogue happening just in the chat. Hopefully we'll have a chance to download that as well. But to our illustrious panelists, thank you so much for your time this evening and for our conversation. What an enriching and inspiring dialogue. And we look forward to it continuing. So with that, I'd like to conclude the panel discussion portion and turn it back to you, Les.
Great. Thank you, Shelly. Thank you, panelists. Awesome discussion. It didn't take much prompting to kind of open the doors for conversation here, which was great. And there was just a lot of good gems from there. I have a page and a half of notes for myself. So really, really welcome conversation and much appreciated. So thank you all. And what I want to, and I guess we could do the round of applause if there is such a thing in Zoom, but well-deserved, absolutely well-deserved. So what at BRIIA, one of the reasons we do these kinds of things is because we want to learn. But the other reason is that we believe that every entrepreneur deserves a chance, and it doesn't matter whether or not it's gender-based or opportunity-based, because, and I think privately maybe our investor panelists would admit this as well, that is that we try to be good pickers of companies, but we're not perfect. And there are always entrepreneurs who could succeed if they had the right tools and the right support to go the next step and go the next mile. And so we take the attitude at BRIIA that entrepreneurial success is just a vital thing. It's something that every entrepreneur deserves a chance to start a company, to grow a company, to get the right fuel in the tank to really scale the company. And if we don't have entrepreneurship, it's not a good thing. We kind of accept the world as it is, and it just doesn't change. And that's not something that I think, at least at BRIIA, we see as a really desirable outcome. So in true form, at BRIIA, we always kind of think about these events and say, okay, so we've got all this great information. What's next? What do we do? And so we are defining tonight, we are starting a multi-year, multifaceted project around the issue of women successfully raising capital for their startups. And we're calling it Defy the Odds. We know that today, less than 3% of all venture capital funds go to women-led companies. And that is the single statistic that we would like to see change, because that's what we do. And so we're kind of taking what our competency is and saying, we see the big problem, we can't change it all, but there's one thing that we can do, and that is to help more women-led founders get funded. And accordingly, we have a really big, hairy, audacious goal, as every good initiative should have. And our goal is to fund 25 companies, 25 women-led AI, SaaS, B2B companies that are AI powered by December 31st of 2025. So our 25 by 25 is our mission. And we have 3 ways we're going to do that. One is we're going to be proponents of the issue and just continue to make sure that people know it's an issue and that we're trying to fix it, and find people that, like us, also want to fix it. So raising awareness. We also want to develop the programs that are necessary. We don't want to do the right things to support women founders. We don't want to do the wrong things. We want to be the good advice, Diane, not the bad advice. And really kind of think about what we do today and what things might be not helpful to women as they raise funds, and add the things that could be more appropriate. And then finally, we want to build a really sustainable and supportive ecosystem. We know that it takes a village to raise a startup. It takes investors, it takes advisors, it takes resources, it takes the right program, it takes the right conversations with the right people at the right time. And so starting tonight, we really want to build out the ecosystem that supports women founders in our program. And as we have, as it turns out, a whole bunch of our potential ecosystem in the audience tonight, what we thought we'd do is we would say, here are some places you can help us out. And so every good entrepreneur has an ask. We're an entrepreneur. Our ask is we have 9 different roles that we know that we will need somewhere along the journey. And we'll have multiple people doing these same roles. This isn't a one-to-one matching, but 3 or 4 people will take on some of these tasks. And let me just go through them briefly. So we need a data scout, some people to just kind of monitor the data around women funding and measure how we're doing and what things can we learn from the data that we can inform us to do things differently. We want to have more events that either bring women founders together, bring women founders and investors together, et cetera. So that's what an event planner would help us do. We want to be outward bound in our communication about not only the issue, but also what we're doing about the issue. And so any marketing advice, we're totally open to. We want to have a current events scouting team, which really looks at places where we can connect with other organizations that are in this journey together, working to change the dynamics in women startups getting funded. And then in the middle, in the ecosystem building, we just need the people who are really good connectors. We need to find more founders that we can bring together in our program and serve. We need to find more investors who are friendly to the women-led companies that we attract. And we want to reach into the colleges and universities and get those founders who may be MBA students or maybe they're undergraduate students who are thinking about developing a company, and we want to support them in that journey. And then last but not least is the programmatic things, which are the sort of accelerator program advisor, the outside view of what we should be doing in our program to support women, and helping us match the women founders that are in our programs with the ecosystem, with the founders, the mentors that are in our network. And so to make this really easy for you, so we've given you the names, now we'll give you the descriptions, and I'm going to launch a quick poll, and it'll make it really easy for you just to tell us which of these roles you'd like to help us support. And are you seeing the poll on screen? All right. Everybody seeing that? Okay. And it's just, there are two questions. One is, what role would you like to help us with? And then the second role is, if you're not able to do that, we understand not everybody can. Let us know how you'd like to kind of stay connected with the program, and we'll go from there. So let me just give that another 15 seconds or so as people respond. Oh, actually, we've got 30 seconds on the clock, so we'll do 30 seconds. All right, 10-second warning. Getting some good responses here. This is great. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. All right, well, we're gonna cut off the polling for the time being. You can always email either Sharanya at BRIIA.io or me. Sharanya is our student intern. She's a high school student intern at Cal High, just around the corner from us, and is with us throughout the year working on this program. She's just been a really key catalyst. And as a matter of fact, I have one more slide, which is to thank all of the people that really made this happen. Our panelists, Shelly, thank you for moderating. Attendees, thank you for making this an important part of your day and allocating the time to us. Kate Tavella is a sophomore now at Georgetown University School of Business, and she did a whole bunch of research this summer that really kicked off our interest and our ability to kind of tackle this project and take it on. Eric Wu, who was a mentor of BRIIA. Thank you, Eric, for the introduction to Cindy. And of course, in the audience tonight are a number of men and women in the BRIIA Mentor Network. And I am always so grateful for all of the time and the spirit in which they come at supporting entrepreneurship. At the bottom of the screen, I know there are 3 organizations that are with us tonight in person. And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is sort of the beginning of our ecosystem, but we really appreciate the fact that they've come here with us tonight. So with that, we will wrap for the night. I want to, again, wish you all well in your separate endeavors. And I hope we can come back a year from now and at least begin to move the needle, begin to change the odds of women getting founders. And if you know other people who are interested in supporting that cause, please connect them with BRIIA. Have a good day. Take care.
Thank you.